Yeah, we're rolling.
We're rolling. It is a wintry, wet day in December, and we're gathered. Story from the core, getting ready for 2020. And I'll just give a bit of history, and then I'm sitting here with Chris and Meribeth. And I've just finished in 2019 a beta test of, or a beta group of Story from the Core, which was and is about sharing the work inside of each of us that matters deeply to us in a way that we really want that work to impact the world. It's already impacting the world, but we want to do it on purpose. And the deliverable that we were working on was a book and a keynote and a way to present ourselves online that feels authentic and true and free for us. And in doing that, it became super, super clear that every single individual I was working with needed to do soul work with Chris first. It was remarkable. It's like how quickly things moved, how quickly the communication moved after they had done soul work with Chris. And it also was very, very clear after they came to a writing retreat with Meribeth and I that the structure that they needed set them free, and coming to the writing retreat made that happen. And so while I, along the way, have become the hand holder and the interpreter at times, and the catalyst of story openings. Once those openings happened, the person would just need to go to Chris or Meribeth or back to me. And so now we are gathering to do this on purpose as a threesome. Story from the Core 2020, and really we're diving into this conversation about communication and why does communication matter and what do we bring to our communication today and how does that communication carry in the world and how does that live in the person that's delivering that communication in a way that is alive for them. And so let's jump in with that. Meribeth, you run many interviews. I would love it if you'd be willing to ask the questions now that I've given us an idea of what we're here and talking about. Does that feel okay?
Sure. Well, where I wanted to actually start with all this, I thought it would be really cool to start with a conversation on story, because I love what you wrote the other day. You are story, you come from story, you have story. So I think we should explore that realm a little bit. And Tina, I'm just going to start with you. How did that hit you?
Well, for me, story is like a current, like a pulse, a current that moves. And so it came out that way because there's 3 stages of story. That a story comes from somewhere, right? And then it's in us, and then we give it away. And to me, I'm ridiculously simple sometimes, and being able to sort of just watch the bouncing ball freed me up. And yet the word story is so sacred to me that if we can all connect to that in that simple way, like it's just a beautiful way to live and to share words.
But I also think when you wrote that, you were thinking Tina represents.
Oh yeah, right. For sure.
So are you story?
I would be have a story. I would be have a story, and you are the give the story, right? Like.
But we didn't.
Did I get that back? Did I get that back? I'm getting it mixed up. Okay. You come from story. That's Chris. You are story. That's me. You have a story. That's you. Yeah, that's the way I read it anyway.
Yeah.
Anybody care to disagree?
No, that's fine. That sounds, yeah.
Okay, so you come from story. That's Chris. Did that resonate for you, Chris?
Yeah. Tina, one time to talk, I've always had a long struggle with explaining my work. It's not even my work. The work that happens and I'm there to help with. And one time in a talk, Tina, you actually said you defined soul as the story one comes in with. And I actually thought that was the best definition of a thing I had been struggling for years with and been working on and couldn't find the words for myself. So yeah, to me, soul in that sense, or we could call it personal essence, or any number of other words, whatever a word person likes, is the fundamental singularity or uniqueness of a being. Like, I sometimes kind of say, like, you know, there's kind of one sun and one light, but there's different rays as rays. They're distinct as rays coming from that one light, that one sun. And that to me is soul. The really to honor and appreciate the distinction of the ray, which is actually the thing that actually lands into earth, right? It's not the sun that's per se, that's like, it's the rays that penetrate into life. And I think when we're talking about the ability to have expressed power and alignment and grounding and centering in one's being, it's as the embodiment of the soul.
So this is a bit of an aside from our thing, but
Sure.
I think it's relevant. When people come to you and want to work with you, what do they get out of it? And I mean, they might get something out of it different than what's intended, or I mean, what do you hope for?
That's a great question. Thank you. That they're able to recognize. To me, the soul has its own grammar. If we're using language like communication again, or story, the soul of each person is their own unique language. It has its own grammar. It has its own messaging and communication. And for me, my interest ultimately is that people learn, or maybe we'd say relearn, or remember the language of their soul. Like, what are the specific metaphors that come from their being? What is the vibe? What is the mood? What is the tone? What is the style that is actually genuine to that being? And to be able to recognize it amidst the cacophony and the noise and the din of so many other voices internally or externally and out in the world and so on, to be able to actually find the signal in one's own being amidst the noise, to like really feel it in yourself, recognize it, know it in a most kind of experiential, practical way, and then go about, okay, now that I can align and connect and really feel and know this is my soul here, this is like I'm on point here, I'm connected, I'm online, then to let that kind of rip, basically.
Can I add into this? Having now had 3 people work with Chris in their communication as we're working on their book, that's the piece that moves us so much faster. Because once that beacon, if you will, right, that online space, there's a knowing, an experiential knowing. For some, it's in their body, they can feel it, or for others, it's whatever it is. It's, you know, it's that state of being of now the words are on my path. These are my words. This is my story, and it's just like you said. What I find with writers, and Meribeth, you could speak to this too, is, you know, there are writers that can write and 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 write, and then there are writers who have such a hard time getting any words out onto the page. And once they've done work with you, that it's like that magnetism is there to bring them onto their story, and it frees it up. And for those who write and write and write and write and write, it all of a sudden it just whoosh, and they can get the message that they're called to write right now.
So this really kind of makes me all tingly. Just thinking about why why write? Why do it? Why put the effort in the first place? And it's actually something I really struggle with myself. Especially right now, we are in this funny place in the world in a million different ways, but in terms of communication, we are moving out. I mean, I think we already kind of have moved out from the era of traditional media, which obviously blocks a lot of people out. But then when everyone has a voice, whose voice matters? And how do I know that I'm going to put something out there that will even be heard by anyone? Like sometimes I feel like, wow, my mom always looks up to see if I'm writing something. But
Hey, Mom!
hey, Mom, thanks. I got a fan. Sometimes it's hard to keep going if you feel like I'm not going to be heard or... And I think that's why it's also really important to have that super hardcore clarity of message and knowing that whatever your message is so important from your sort of depths, right? Mm-hmm. I said something earlier in conversation about the people we're going to work with in this program are the people who know their piece of puzzle piece in the world and know that it matters. And maybe, I think we all struggle with knowing that our puzzle piece matters. But they're ready to own that little unique ray beating down on the earth and just to own it and to say I am going to put it out there because I know it matters and not, it's not worry about the impact because it is important to have an impact.
For sure.
It's really important to have an impact. But I think if you know really deeply what the significance and importance of your message is, what the purpose of your puzzle piece is, then you know that it will have that impact. Am I wrong about that?
No. I think you're onto something else. It's actually bringing me to something else. I have a question for Chris about it because I don't know what your thoughts are about this, but I believe this. I'm wondering what you can add to it. So this goes back to your piece about whether or not it matters, and in connection to the soul piece. So my belief is that when we are dialed into that, or when we're online, I love that because we still know the difference between offline and online, right? It's like, are we switched on? So when we're switched on in our soul space, we're like, yeah, I'm in, and we are communicating from that place. My belief is that the communication has called to us, right? So books come and knocking or whatever, like they're like, king, you need to share this with the world. But as we give voice to that impulse, I think that it's that impulse that as we share that from that impulse, the vibration, if you will, of that impulse is part of the puzzle piece. It is actually a story that you've been called to write. You've been called to share. And therefore, there is an audience waiting. So energetically, could you speak to that? Like, am I making shit up?
No, I guess how I would say it is when someone is sort of in the pocket, right? When they're dialed in and aligned, as much as insofar as to the degree that any of us can be at any moment. So close enough, right? It does create resonance. It also creates, in a healthy way, actually repulsion for those who might not be interested and wouldn't necessarily be a good fit. So it creates natural kind of attraction for those for whom such a message would be resonant and they would be allured by it, and for other people for whom it wouldn't really be a good fit, they're kind of like, oh, thanks. And it's actually... versus a muddy message where you get either kind of like yeah or no or not sure, you get like yeses and nos. So I think that's true.
So you get the right yeses and the right nos.
Yeah. That I think is really clear. What I think is, I guess what I would add, or thinking in terms of the three of us and of this process, is the ability for that connected story from core. So this may be another way of doing the, like, there's three of us, there's three words, and we give each of us a word. If this is the core piece we're speaking to, then that core is then going to be brought through the narrative and the story of one's life, which is where a lot of where your work comes in, Tina. And then the ability to harness and channel that connected message and create a structure that is liberating and congruent, which is Mary Beth's genius. Then the combination of those three, I think, is really where, at the nexus of those, is really where the power and the synthesis lies.
Right. Because it's the difference between standing on a street corner or on a stage and, you know, being soulful, like being online and expressing, which I would totally say I've done most of my life. This is how I've communicated from my soulful place, but really like splatters, like splatter paint out there, which does create impact, but it doesn't create, it doesn't fulfill all that I really can and do bring to the table.
And not all of us are willing to do that.
No, right?
You're a rare bird.
Right.
But because there are those who have impact, but all of that impact is still behind them. Like if you just played it up visually, like all of my impact then, like splatter paint, would have been outside. But then there are those where it's all behind them because it hasn't found their way through that's safe and beautiful for them and expressed. Yeah. Yeah. So this has been super helpful for me. I hope it's been helpful for you guys too.
Yeah, it's been awesome.
And really fun to kind of play in what are we actually gathering for, and what's kind of the realm that we're working in. This kind of feels like what this, you know, what this is. Let's leave this for now, and we'll come back again and maybe dive into why this matters so much to us. That sound like a good idea?
Sounds good.
All right.